This is DGMT's Learning Lunch, and I'm your host, Rahima Esop. On today's deep dive conversation, we are talking about fellowships as a means to spark social change. Fellowships can become energetic communities as they grow larger, or networks that have a creative life of their own. But the scaling properties, let's be honest, of fellowships are notoriously difficult to define and measure. This is what we will be talking about today with my guests, Carol Ann Fowlis from DGMT's Innovation Fellowship, Rumbi Gergens from the Mamandla Fellowship, and Andy Siwe Tlungwane from Teachers Can. They are all part of the DG Murray Trust. When I look at the three fellowships we are talking about today, the common threads are that these fellowship programs are being used to 1. Positively shape societal outcomes, 2. They are investment in leadership, and 3. They promote network or community building. But as we tend to do on this podcast, I want to approach this topic from a slightly different angle, starting with the concept of soft power. Not in the geopolitical sense where one nation tries to influence another nation, not at all. We're not there. Instead, I'm thinking about an organization's ability to positively shape the opinions, perceptions, and ultimately the behavior of others through education, experiential learning, and cultural immersions. In a sense, this is my opinion, of course, a version of soft power is at play as fellows are used to positively shape societal outcomes. Do you agree, Carol Ann, or do you have a different take?
Thanks, Rahima. I really like the idea of soft power, and it really strikes me as something that is quite different from hard power, which I see as things like rules and regulations and policy. It suggests something that's a lot harder to quantify and more difficult to see. And I think that's a really accurate way of talking about what we're doing when we're developing people. There's such an unknown quantity of potential in people. I think it's unknown often to themselves, and it's also often unknown to others until they really get onto that path of development. And yet what we know is that there is limitless potential there. People can learn so much as soon as they start to become aware of themselves, of their skills, their capabilities, their strengths, their unique qualities. And when people do that, when they really start to tap into who they are, what they bring, and what's important to them, I think they become enormously powerful.
Thanks, Carol Ann. Each of the fellowships are targeting a population that would not generally be invested in as leaders. So teachers, particularly young teachers, mothers. No one thinks about mothers as leaders when in fact they are. And then middle management within civil society organizations. Now, for those of you who have never heard of the newly rebranded Innovation Fellowship, it takes a quote-unquote whole person approach to leadership development. What does that mean?
So for us, what that means is really starting from the inside out. You really have to look at the whole person, their history, their experiences to date, their quirks, their temperament, their likes and their dislikes. You really have to understand that person in their entirety, not just the roles that they bring to work. When you start there, you give people a real possibility to then move out into the world. Because from that place of understanding yourself, you then can start to understand yourself in relationship, and you then can understand yourself in relationships in your organization and in relationships in the world out there. And you start to learn how to leverage yourself to influence those relationships.
What sort of societal outcomes are being shaped through investing in these particular fellows?
So this partly depends on how open the organizations are to the fellows and the ideas and thinking and skills that they bring back to the organization. Because, we're talking about organizations, in this case NGOs, that have got societal impact, that are working towards societal impact. So if you can get the fellow to really be thinking about what it is that they can bring to this organization that's going to have greater impact. And then you combine that with the organization, giving them the space and the freedom to do that. I think you've got a really potent combination. We've learned over the course of the last couple of years a little bit about how to make the organizations more open and receptive to the fellows. And partly this means helping the fellows to learn how to deal with resistance to change. So learning how to navigate the inevitable resistance that comes when you're trying to bring new ideas and new thoughts to an organization or a place.
Let's turn to the second common thread now, investment in leadership. Now, this is explicit, Carol Ann, in the Innovation Fellowship for Civil Society, but less so when one shallowly looks at the Mamandla Fellowship. Mamandla is for mothers and mother supporters linked to Embrace, the movement for mothers. On closer inspection, leadership is central to the Mamandla Fellowship, which is positioned as a unique opportunity to redefine who leaders are and what leadership is. Personally, I think it's feminist, forward-thinking, clever, and challenges people's perceptions about leadership and motherhood and who is a leader and who can be a leader. So Rumbi, explain the thinking behind this.
Thanks, Rahima. I think the Mamandla Fellowship is different in that it started as a way of bringing like-minded people together who didn't necessarily have a platform to work together. So they're not coming from an organization necessarily. They're not associated with one another. So it's about creating a space where they can connect with each other, because what we found in our work is the magic in our field definitely really happens when people who are working in isolation in their communities, dealing with really difficult issues that mothers are facing, often feel very kind of alone, isolated, and the magic really happens when they come together with one another and network. And so it's about creating a space where they can start to build those quasi-professional networks with one another, and also acknowledge that the work that they're doing, even though it might feel like it's just them against a whole other bunch of factors, they're not alone in that work. And that was the thinking, really, is we wanted to answer the question of how do you realize a movement for mothers? How do you capture the potential and the power that exists in the connections that mothers have with one another and turn that into a force for change? And so Mamandla really is the platform, and a big part of what we do is ensure that we cement those group dynamics and those relationships between the fellows. When we recruit, we don't do individual interviews. We do group interviews, because that's the key to the fellowship, really, is you've got to be in a place where you can contribute to and get benefit from a group. Because none of our fellows are coming from a particular profession or a particular organization or a specialty. They're all kind of they're drawn because they're passionate about the issues facing mothers. And so we want to make sure that that passion is also kind of mixed in with an openness to being part of a group and contributing to this community.
Rumbi, Carol Ann succinctly explained what the whole person approach to development entails. How would you describe the Mamandla approach?
It's congruent with that, in that we're looking at the whole person. I do think it is also about welcoming perspectives and experiences that are not always brought into development spaces. So we have sessions where we talk, quite frankly, about issues around birth and pregnancy and the network of support that mothers can access. So in a way, so it's kind of bringing the whole person in. But for mothers in particular, and for people who've been mothered, it's talking about the things that you don't think belong in professional or formal spaces. You've probably never had to consider your breastfeeding experience in a room where you're talking about social change. And so it's bringing the whole person in, and some of the taboo things that we don't talk about that come with motherhood.
Allow me to paraphrase here, but in your earlier response, you mentioned that the Mamandla Fellowship is one of the building blocks for the movement and to cement the movement. So what are the societal outcomes that you are hoping to shift with the fellowship then?
That's a good question. So Mamandla is in its fourth iteration now. We've got our fourth cohort just launched a couple of weeks ago. And we are now starting to really look at how we can communicate the impact. More than anything, what's been useful for us to track is the different connections that fellows have made and the work that they've tapped into. So we have a number of fellows across the cohorts who are particularly interested in supporting parents of premature infants. So that work is ongoing. We have a number of fellows who are interested in supporting mothers through birth. Some of them we have an OBGYN in our one cohort. That's kind of the impact that we've been trying to create, is bringing together people who are working kind of in isolation, connecting them with one another, and turning kind of those sparks into something bigger. The radical thing with birth is we've been trying to have conversations around what formalized birth support looks like that's accessible to all women in South Africa. Because we know doulas are usually only accessible to middle and upper middle class women who can afford it. Even becoming a doula is a specialized process, and you have to have access to certain resources. So what does it look like when we bring together women who have had some formal doula training, women who have a passion and who have been doing lay doula work in their communities? How do we bring them together? How do we bridge the gaps around access and grow this idea of supporting a woman through her pregnancy and birth and early postpartum?
Let's pause on that idea of growing. What does the concept of scale mean in the context of a fellowship like Mamandla? Taking into consideration the complexity and the nuance of your previous response, what does scale look like?
Initially, when we started Mamandla, the vision was that we were going to be growing the cohort size every year. It quickly became apparent as we kind of dived into it that was not possible, partly because it's a very expensive process, but also because what we were looking for was not scale in terms of the number of fellows or the geographic reach, even though that is something that we have kind of in the back of our minds. We're always trying to find fellows who are in more far-flung areas. But what we were starting to learn is it's really about the depth of impact that we can make through supporting these fellows. What that looks like for Mamandla is the fellowship year. It's quite intense in that we do a lot of input. They have masterclasses on certain issues. We've got in-person immersions. They've got access to materials and access to, quote unquote, experts in certain areas in the field of motherhood and social development. And the idea is to take the work that you are doing and deepen it, strengthen it through the connections with other fellows, yes, but also with the tools that we are giving you. So the Mamandla Toolkit is what we call it, is comprised of your connections with other fellows, your connections to people who are experts in particular areas, and then also the skills and the knowledge that you are getting out of the process.
I just want to follow on to that. So let's imagine a Mamandla fellow starting out in a cohort. That's the beginning point. As they continue on this journey, is there a sort of roadmap and certain milestones and an end point, or do you not see it in that way?
We do see it that way, but we're not prescriptive about what the milestones are. So your entry and your first year is usually the most intense in terms of contact with other fellows, contact with the Embrace team, and you are heavily involved in the work that Embrace is doing. So the work that we're doing outside of Mamandla, we require our fellows to be boosters in that sense, to attend events when we have events, to share ideas on social media. We kind of push around that. Once you've graduated out of your fellowship year, you are then moving into a space of being part of the alumni. And now that we have 3 cohorts gone, that is a much bigger group that you're joining. And so that you're called upon to contribute and make connections with people who you might not have gone through a fellowship year with. So those are kind of the 2 big things. The alumni concept is still developing. Last year we had our first series of alumni gatherings, and out of that came this idea that they would like a working group that's bringing together all of the alumni and all of the work that they've been doing post their year in fellowship together. So that's the next kind of big marker. Is you graduate out of your fellowship year, you move into your alumni year, and you then become, in a sense, a fellow at large, basically.
Carol Ann, based on what Rumbi's just said about the importance of the alumni network and it being a space for the Mamandla fellows to be fellows at large, I think that's the phrase that you used. In terms of the design of a fellowship program, how do you distribute human resources and capacitate these programs so that the alumni networks are kept engaged for years to come, and the alumni is not an afterthought, but is a consideration right at the onset when initiating the fellowship program?
Yeah, that is something that came to us later. And I like what you're saying, to think about the design of it from the beginning. But what we have done to bring the alumni in, when you're talking about the growth of leaders and leadership, experience and skills and capacity is a big part of that. And these alumni are growing and developing that. So what we really have tried to do is bring them back as the experts into the fellowship. So we increasingly have panels where the alumni come and talk about what they've been doing. We have masterclasses where the alumni run the masterclasses on key topics. So that's available both to other alumni and to the fellows if they want to come. They come and talk about what the experience is like of taking back new ideas into an organization and how they've done that. So, yeah, we really are trying to bring the alumni back as resources rather than going and looking further afield for those kind of experts. Our alumni are our experts on leadership and innovation. And we found that the fellows respond so positively to that. They love it.
Thanks, Carol Ann. On that note, I want to bring Andisiwe into the conversation because the Teachers Can Fellowship, which she is involved in, has a long-term vision to unite a network of young teachers who are passionate and committed to building an education sector that will ensure every child in this country receives quality education. The network will be theoretically led by the fellows. Andisiwe, in theory, this sounds amazing. I'm all for it. But what has been your experience in bringing this vision to life?
We are in our 3rd year as Teachers Can. Our fellowship, we have our 3rd cohort going right now. And from the onset, we were really adamant about recruiting teachers who showed potential to be leaders and who showed potential to be change agents. So that's what we really focused on. But in terms of really trying to build a network out of this fellowship, we realized quite early on that there's also a 3rd element, which is really being a community builder. So our young teachers have to see themselves as leaders and change agents, but on top of that, they have to be able to want to share what they've learned, to want to go out into community and recruit other young teachers who are not going to have the opportunity to be part of the fellowship, to buy into this idea of Teachers Can, to buy into our manifesto, to buy into the idea of building community, but also beyond that, to really want to see a change within the broader community. Because if you think about it, South Africa has 447,000 teachers, I think. We take 25 teachers into our fellowship every year. There is no way that we're going to reach all those teachers. So it's really trying to ensure that the people we bring in want to do more than just grow themselves. And then on top of that, what we also learned is that you really need to support teachers to be able to do this. So we need to have a clear framework of how they are going to be able to do this. We have to have a clear sort of thing which they can rally around, and ways in which they can bring other teachers on board on this journey. So what we've done is that we've had to develop a framework for our fellows for their local sort of community mobilizing. And we've had to hire someone specifically to do that. So we have in Teachers Can someone who is a network mobilizer who supports our young teachers to be able to mobilize other young teachers and buy into our manifesto and really go out there and try and make this network come to life.
So this hunger and desire and energy to not only want to improve oneself, but also to build a community, I guess, is why the fellowship is targeting young teachers, right? Because they might have that spirited desire to do that. Tell me a bit more then about the approach of this fellowship. Rumbi and Carol Ann explained their approach, a whole person development approach. Rumbi explained that that's part of what Mamandla is trying to do. What is the approach from the Teachers Can Fellowship?
So similar to the Innovation Fellowship and the Mamandla Fellowship, we also really do focus on the whole person. But what we have that is, I think, quite unique is the fact that all these people are in the same profession. So it is the whole person, but it's how your whole identity sort of comes into your being as a professional teacher and as a change agent teacher. So we start off with the concept of identity as a change agent teacher, really looking at the stories of the teachers, looking at how that's impacted how they show up in their practice, how they show up in schools, how they show up in community. And then the second theme looks at generative communities. We know that a lot of our schools are actually not generative communities, sometimes quite destructive places, and there's a lot of bullying that happens. So we really focus on what generative communities are for our young teachers so they can start to understand what that is and what sort of dream we have for schools and for the teaching experience. And then in the third immersion, we focus on influence. And there we're trying to really focus on how they can see themselves as leaders even if they're not in leadership positions. How can you influence without necessarily having that hard power? And so that's sort of how we've structured our fellowship, is really starting from the inside and then looking at community and looking at how we can influence.
I actually have met one of your fellows. He is a grade R teacher, a sparky young person who is committed to bringing about positive change in the small village that he lives. I would assume that that's the kind of sparky character that you're looking for in other fellows. Can you describe, and I'm hesitant to use the word perfect, or ideal, but can you describe the ideal fellow?
So our fellows are all very different, so it's really hard to say what ideal is. But it's really someone who I think has a passion for education, has a passion for their community, has a passion for children, and really is still really motivated to see things change, right? Who sees that they have some agency. They might not fully understand their agency in the system because we often don't see ourselves within the system and the role that we can play, but who can see that there are some little things that I can do, that I can change within my community. So someone who starts a reading club, they might not see the big difference that they're making, but they're doing something and they're seeing like sort of the small bits of agency that they have. So I think more than anything is just really having someone who can see the little bits of agency that they have within this really complex, really sometimes rigid system that they find themselves in.
A difficult question now, Andisiwe. Let's talk about input and outcome. each of the fellowships we've discussed today are quite intensive, requiring planning, funding, coordination, energy, and input from the program implementers. And I know firsthand that each of you are working in very small teams. So are you seeing the return on investment in terms of the labor and the input that goes into these fellowship programs?
So I think the response to that is quite a nuanced one, and it's also like there's lots of levels to what is the outcome that we're getting. We have to be very intentional about who we're recruiting and how we're supporting the people. So this year we've started our local connects, which is really these young teachers who are part of the fellowship, who volunteered themselves to start building and piloting this idea of how do we build community for ourselves? How do we bring around 10 young teachers within our community and also principals and SGB members? We've actually had SGB members sit in the local connects and build a community around this manifesto and try and bring about change within our community. Try to unpack this manifesto. What does it mean for our context? So in terms of outcome, we're quite early in our journey, but I do think that there are small things that we're starting to see and lessons that we're learning that will guide how we are going to measure our impact and will guide what we're trying to do in terms of ensuring that outcome is equal to the input that we're putting into this fellowship.
As we wrap up then this conversation, I want to give each of you an opportunity to plug your fellowships. When are the application dates open? And who should apply? Andisiwe, let's start with you.
So our applications open in October of 2023 and the closing date is in December 2023. And we are looking for young teachers who are dynamic, who have 0 to 5 years experience, who really want to make a difference in their communities, who see themselves not as victims, but really as people who can shape the spaces that they find themselves in. Any young teacher across South Africa who's really interested in making a difference and really building community for themselves, as well, because teaching can feel like isolated practice. So really interested in building community for themselves. That's who we're looking for.
Carol Ann?
Thanks, Rahima. So our applications open in October, November, although you can put in an expression of interest throughout the year. So our website is in the process of being set up and you can submit an expression of interest throughout the year. But we start formally recruiting in October, November and do interviews in January. We're looking for people who've got the hunger and the drive to be future leaders of NGOs. And that's a very particular kind of person because it's not, it's not the best paid job. It's not very well resourced. It needs people who really, I suppose, are wanting to see a better South Africa and know that NGOs are the vehicle for that and who want to shake it up a bit because I think the NGO sector is in quite an interesting place of change. And so we want those people who will come and shake it up and make it look different down the line.
Rumbi?
Mamandla applications open up in March, April next year, and the fellowship runs from May, June to the next year's May, June. And if you are someone who is passionate about the issues of early motherhood, you don't have to be a mother, but you care about the experiences of young mothers, you care about the experiences of pregnant women, you care about the access that mothers have in our society and making mothers' voices heard. If you see motherhood as something that is building society and that needs to have a place at the table, then Mamandla is for you. You can find out more at embrace.org.za/Mamandla. I'm also going to plug here. We have we recently put out our very first publication, which basically details the story of how the fellowship was set up and gives insight into the kinds of connections we're looking to make and the kinds of impacts that we're hoping the fellowship will drive. The publication is called The Power Trip, and you can find it at our website.
Thanks, Rumbi. On an individual level, fellowships build leadership. These leaders form a community or a network, and their activities can help positively shape societal outcomes. And today we've heard examples of how this is being done in a variety of ways and how we should be thinking about leaders and leadership in different ways. And now, over to you, those listening to this podcast. Using what you have heard today, you can try this reflective exercise to think about leadership and what leadership means to you. You'll need a pen and paper to write down these steps or download the takeaway sheet from our website, learninglunch.dgmt.co.za. Write down the following questions and spend some time reflecting on them by yourself, and if you like, share your reflections with your colleagues. Question number 1. Map out the communities that you are a part of and the different roles you play in each community. Question number 2. Once you've done that, ask yourself, how are you showing up as a leader in each of these spaces? Question number 3. Now think about what you need as a person to take your leadership to the next level. And question number 4. Think about ways in which you can invest in your own leadership development. It doesn't have to be a formal program. It could also be finding the right mentor. This was DGMT's Learning Lunch. Until next time.